We'll get started in 1 minute, everyone. Just waiting for a few more people to log in. All right, I think we'll get started. We promised you 10 o'clock and we'd like to stick to our time commitment. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Headhunters and Talent Click with your valuable time. My name is Danielle Bragg. I'm actually one of the co-founders of the Headhunters and Temps Ahead. And we're excited today. For those of you leaders and hiring managers on our call today that have had the opportunity to work with us in the past, you would know that adding value to our clients and helping us grow successful businesses has really become a real top priority for the Headhunters team. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to work with us in the past, we're very glad that you've joined us. Thank you. In order for us to continue to keep you on the cutting edge for 2017, what we've chosen to do this year is partner with experts in a wide range of topics that are critical to employers to help you move your businesses forward. Our theme today is how to hire safer workers using risk-based personality assessments. We're very excited to introduce you to our guest expert, Greg Ford. Greg is the CEO and co-founder of Talent Click Workforce Solutions. They're a global firm that specializes in employee psychometric testing and training. They have clients in over 40 countries worldwide, including names that you might recognize such as SC Johnson, Valero, ArcelorMittal, Hewitt, Canfor, C-SPAN, and many, many more. Greg has also been an adjunct professor at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He holds a degree in psychology and a master's degree in workplace learning. His articles have been published in numerous magazines and journals, such as Bloomberg News, Workplace Today, and others. He's also spoken at dozens of conferences and webinars internationally. Please help me welcome Greg, who's here today to help you create a safer, happier, and productive workforce. Greg is going to walk us through about a 45-minute webinar, and then what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a quick Q&A from you guys. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Greg Ford of Talent Click. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Danielle, and hello to everyone joining us today. The Headhunters recruitment firm is actually one of Talent Click's longest-standing clients. For years, we've had a great partnership, and they use our assessments with each and every candidate they interview as a way to find better job and culture fit, and to reduce turnover, increase job satisfaction for employees, increase productivity, and so forth. Now, some of you may have hired people through the Headhunters, and if you have, you've probably seen one of our assessments, the WPP, that's the Work Style and Performance Profile. But for those of you new to assessments, we're glad to have you here today. Today we're going to look at the why and the how of personality assessments and focus in particular on an emerging area of psychometrics for identifying safety and risk. Now, this webinar will be recorded. I think Kristen's hit the record button, and you'll have access to it afterwards through the Headhunters, just in case you want to review it afterwards or even share it with anyone. So let's get started. So here's the agenda we're going to cover today. Essentially, we'll do a real quick overview on what is the problem that we're dealing with. And the second is, what is personality risk? Number 3, how do we measure personality? And 4, how do you use the results? That's the most important section today is, where does the rubber meet the road and how can you actually use those results? Number 5, of course, is does it really work? I'm going to share with you some some case studies and actual metrics and improvements for some companies. And we will have a bit of time at the end for some Q&A, okay? So being mindful, but of course, theory is nice, but as I said, the rubber has to meet the road and we have to deliver some outcomes and objectives with this kind of thing. This is what we tend to focus on. We have to be hyper-focused on what is the organization looking for. When you deal with a psychologist in our space, a really good one, they have to be thinking about decreasing negative events and increasing positive events as well. So I'm not going to read each of these, but you get a sense of what I'm talking about anyhow. Does it work? Absolutely. Employers are saving time, money, and lives. And here are just a couple of metrics. You can see that there can be an improvement in quality of hires, in employee turnover, and also in the actual safety incidents. And that's, of course, what we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about today is safety and risk. So let's look at the problem. Well, everyone knows what a bad hire looks like after they've been hired. Have you ever worked with anyone that you thought was going to be a great new employee, and 3 months, 6 months into the job, you think, what were we thinking? This person just isn't who we thought they were. And the problem with that is, people sometimes interview very well. They're great interviewers. And once they get into the job, their true colors come out. So the stats show that actually 1 out of 4 people is higher risk for things like bad attitude, low productivity, absenteeism, turnover, could be theft, fraud, violence. Those are all risk-based behaviors. If you're a safety-sensitive company, you could have accidents, or as we call them, of course, incidents. And those incidents could be injuries, fatalities, property damage, and so on. Now, when we attach some dollars to this, of course, we're talking about a big, big impact to companies. I'm not sure what the impact might be to your organization, but I'm guessing you're here on the line today because you're seeing some of these problems as well. So let's talk about why you might be here today. I'm going to try something here, which is a poll, and I'm going to launch the poll. And why don't you pick what your biggest safety challenge is? Just click on one of those buttons there. Is it that you don't have safe and proper equipment or machinery? Is it a lack of standard operating procedures? Is it the training? Is it human error that's causing your safety issues? So just take a quick second to punch in one of those radio buttons. So I'm seeing the results on screen, and it looks like, very interesting, looks like, I'll just punch this up on screen so hopefully you can see this now. Almost nobody says standard operating procedures, it's only 7%. Nobody has said safe and proper equipment. Quite a number of you said training. That's interesting and good to hear. But most folks here, 62%, have said the incidents are due to human error. And that's what we find time and again with organizations, is there's an issue with human error. In fact, when we look at the causes of incidents, human factor can be broken down into a number of different things. And you'll see down at the bottom, attention failure, the one just above that, procedural violations, procedural decisions, and so on. 90% of workplace incidents are usually caused by human factors. Now, I want to make one thing clear. We're just one of the human factors. When we talk about personality, there could also be things such as fatigue. And fatigue science is getting a lot of attention these days, as it should. There could be, someone may have had a baby at home and they're up all night and they're tired. Or maybe they're dealing with stress. There could be marital difficulties or financial troubles. So we acknowledge that there are other human factor causes at play as well. If you're a company that deals with transportation, let's say you have drivers on the road, these are some really interesting stats. Every 2 miles, the average driver makes 400 observations, 40 decisions, and 1 mistake. And once every 500 miles, one of those mistakes leads to a near collision. Once every 61,000 miles, one of those mistakes leads to a crash. And if we look at the major crashes, the causal factors are human is the bulk of those causal factors. 56% involve recognition errors, and that can include distraction and inattention. 52% involve decision errors, which is judgment or even deliberate decisions to drive unsafely. I'm going to touch on a few of these because they're directly related to personality. But the issue is, you heard me earlier talk about how, 1 out of 4 people is higher risk. Doesn't make them a bad person, but I'm talking about higher risk for safety-sensitive positions. And too often, traditional interviews take place. We think someone's a great guy, and we hire them. You know what? Traditional interviewing has a 50% success rate. It's literally a coin toss. And we're here to take that up to a much higher level. When I say we, I'm talking about people in our industry, not just TalentClick, but people, occupational psychologists dealing with assessments for safety-sensitive roles. Look at this. You've probably seen this kind of image before, the iceberg. What you can see above the surface is the past experience on the resume, the skills, education. You sit with someone, you see how they look, you hear how they talk. Maybe you decide to move them forward to do a background check or reference check. Make no mistake, those are all important things. We're not saying do away with those. But let's get to below the iceberg at what you can't see. And this is how someone acts when nobody is watching. This is what we talk about with personality. It's how someone is most likely to behave in future. So keep doing the background checks and so on, as I said, but those focus on the past. We're here to talk about predictive analytics. And the predictive analytics field has exploded. Did you know that now 60 to 70% of Fortune 500 companies are using personality assessments now? Back 15 or 20 years ago, that number was cut in half. It was only about 30 to 35%. And the reason it's doubled is there's a few things at play. One is the quality of assessments. Number 2 is that it's easier to use because of technology and cloud-based applications. And the third is that the costs have come way, way down because of the technology, just making it easier. It used to be paper-based assessments that people would have used, and then of course a psychologist had to mark them with an answer key, and it was all very labor-intensive. So how does this kind of testing fit into talent management? Obviously, if you're in HR, you know this is just one piece of the puzzle, and we're here to only talk about that one portion of it, which is at the applicant screening and selection stage. So let's move on to the next part. If you are looking to go away and tell your colleagues or your friends what this webinar was all about, here's a really good way to think about it. Everyone knows we have an IQ for intelligence. Most people know we have an EQ for emotional intelligence. But did you know we also have a natural intelligence around risk? So have a look at these photos. When you look at this, what do you think? What's your gut reaction right now? Are you looking at this and, especially with let's say the kid on the skateboard, are you envisioning a hospital visit with broken bones and so on? Or are you at the opposite end of the spectrum where you're looking at these images thinking, cool, I want to be these guys. There's no right or wrong reaction to this. It's just how we're hardwired. Now think about what's the riskiest thing that you've ever done. When I speak at conferences, I ask this question and I get some feedback from the audience. And I actually had one fellow at a conference, I think it was in Orlando, point to the fellow next to him and say, this guy just said when he was a kid, he lay down between the railroad tracks and let a train pass over him. So that takes the cake. That's the riskiest thing I've ever heard. When you look at these images, what do you gravitate to? Again, no right or wrong. It's just a reflection of our default settings and hardwiring. Some people love puttering in the garden or reading a book and having quiet time. So you'll hear me use these words over and over again. It's our natural tendencies, our impulses, our urges. Personalities are knee-jerk reactions. There's that term default settings and hardwiring. Now I also want to mention that personality is resistant to change. We're not saying that we can change personality. It can change over time. We all mature and become different people, but it very rarely can change on a short-term basis. The exception is if there's been a life-altering event, such as a fatality. And the key with this is that it is indeed predictable. So let's do a quick exercise. Just, wherever you are at your desk, at home, wherever it is, just close your eyes and imagine the very next incident that could take place in your company. I want you to think about where it will take place, envision when it will take place, and predict how it will happen. So just think about that for a second. Now, do certain people come to mind? Are you actually right now envisioning real people, real faces, real names in your organization? Usually when I do this at a conference, about a third of the people stick up their hands and say, yes, I was thinking of actual employees. And why is that? Well, it's because people act in predictable ways. Back when we first started doing this about 5 years ago, we had been doing general personality assessments for more of the, let's call it white-collar, administrative, corporate positions. And this was with a company called ArcelorMittal. They're a $100 billion steel producer based out of Europe. And they said, we love what you're doing with those corporate positions, but can you do anything with the guys on the front line? And we said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, every time the phone rings and we hear there's been an accident out on the mine site, we're always in our minds thinking of the same 10 or 12 guys. And we don't know what it is about that dirty dozen, but they always seem to be the ones causing the problems. And they said, there's extreme cold in the winter, extreme heat in the summer. These guys get physically uncomfortable, and it's only this dirty dozen that when they're uncomfortable, they physically lash out at people or verbally lash out. And we just need to think about how to hire fewer of those people. So that was their issue. It wasn't about wringing 2% more productivity out of these people. It was just about avoiding those altercations in the workplace. So let's move on to part 3. How can you actually measure this? If you have done assessments in the past, you'll know that it's a pretty quick and easy process. It can be a 5-step process. So the first is to benchmark the ideal candidates. I'm going to explain more about that in a minute. Then the actual measuring or testing. I'll talk about that in a second. Step 3 is to actually use the data, the report scores against the benchmarks to help create a short list. Step 4 is, the interviewing and conducting better interviews. And step 5 isn't part of the pre-hire process, but the onboarding, the training, the coaching, which we all know is so important. So let's break it down. Step 1 is the benchmarking. It's really powerful when you know who your top performers are, when you've got actual data. And a tool like this, where you can go through a questionnaire, and there's more questions than this. There's about 60 or 70. And you can rank what's important or somewhat important. And you'll see, for instance, number 3 on the list, follow procedures without questioning them. Some organizations, that might be extremely important if you're dealing with hazardous materials. For others, maybe not as much. Number 4, focus on one task at a time as opposed to being distractible and needing variety and stimulation and so forth. So once a number of stakeholders answer a questionnaire like this, there's some magic that takes place. And here's a sample of a safety assessment. This is the driver safety assessment. And the green boxes on here are the ideal hiring benchmarks, the ranges. And the little starburst with the orange and white represents an individual person's score. So you'll see on the first dimension, resistant versus accommodating, the person's right on the edge. The next one, anxious, they're a little bit outside the range. The third one, impatient versus patient, they're actually nicely within their range, and so on and so forth. So, don't use tools like this as a knockout, as a pass or fail, but when you look at this, you can now think, I need to delve into a few things more with this person during the interview or with their reference checks, or I now know what to keep an eye on. I see that they're going to be quite cautious rather than being impulsive. I don't have to worry about that quite as much post-hire, but I need to really keep an eye on the distractibility. They're so far outside the range. They're going to need a lot of variety and stimulation. I'm going to have to move them around on the job site and give them frequent breaks and so on. Okay? So the testing, as I said, if you haven't done this before, I'll just quickly explain it. You can send an invitation to an employee, and then they can do it at home, or they can sit at a computer on your job site. The assessments with our company and almost any company that is reputable are quick and easy. They're about 15 minutes or less. It could be 10 minutes. They're usually available in a number of different languages. They're at a basic reading level, and in the U.S. it's really important that they're non-invasive, and there's something that is called adverse impact. And again, the quality assessment providers make sure that there's no adverse impact, and that means that it withstands scrutiny for gender, race, and age, and so on. And then, of course, the results. And these days, you heard me talk about cloud-based technology. The reports can be stored in a portal online, and you can access the reports anytime. It can even be 1 year or 2 years later and go retrieve them for someone. And generally those reports come within 1 hour. It could even be within 10 or 15 minutes. Here's a sample of a couple reports. I'm not going to spend much time talking about these because they're not the safety ones, but the one with the blue bars is, as I mentioned, what the Headhunters is using for general personality and work style assessments, and it's a really powerful tool. The one on the left is more concerned with what we call work values and attitude. That's the WVA. So you'll see the first one on the left is, the first dimension is integrity. And then there's responsibility and so on. So that tool is used for companies that are concerned with, let's say, absenteeism or fraud or theft or violence. You'll see the second from the bottom is aggression control, and that tool can be really powerful for those applications. So here's what I'm going to break down in a second. The one on the left is the safety quotient, the SQ, and the one on the right is, as I mentioned, the driver safety quotient. And I'll go through these dimension scores in a second. The third is, once you get the reports, as I mentioned, you can now analyze and rank the applicants and take notes and compare and contrast different candidates. And it really is useful for cutting down on the number of interviews that you might do and focus on the people that you know through the predictive analytics are more likely to behave properly in future. And the interviewing, you heard me mention earlier, can be much more powerful. Each of the reports contains behavioral interview questions that are specifically tailored to the results of that person. So it's not a one-size-fits-all bank of interview questions. They're specifically geared towards that person's results. And so if the person is, let's say, highly distractible, the interview question might be, tell me about a time when you felt bored or you weren't challenged enough in your job. If they're highly, let's say, impatient and irritable, one of the interview questions might be, tell me about a time that you were losing your temper or you did lose your cool. How did you handle it? What have you learned from that? And so this is, as I said, powerful for the interview with the candidate, but also for reference checks with whoever they provide as a referee. And the final one, as I said, onboarding, coaching, after hire. That's not the focus of this today. This is an entirely separate webinar that we could do. But just know that the tools, you don't just assess someone and put it in a filing cabinet and forget about it. It can be a powerful performance management tool that you use on an ongoing basis. All right, let's roll up our sleeves. How do you use the results? So let's use the SQ as an example. Resistant versus accommodating. Resistant people can be defiant, contemptuous of authority, and may ignore the rules. I'm going to tell you a story here. We had a construction client that had on the job site a crane that was loading steel beams into place. And there was a young fellow, I think he'd only been on the job about 6 months, and he knew, he'd been trained, and the standard operating procedure was that he was supposed to use a long-handled alignment wrench to stick up through the holes in the bottom of the steel girder to align them. And for whatever reason, he didn't think that was necessary, so he stuck his fingers up through the bottom of the holes. Well, you know where this is going. The steel beams shifted and sheared off both of his fingers. So that was an example of someone that thought the rules really didn't apply to him. He was more naturally defiant. Whereas people at the other end of the spectrum, accommodating people, take comfort in the rules. They don't need to question authority. And this can be really important, especially, as I said, when there's hazardous goods involved or quality control standards, and you just absolutely cannot afford to have someone breaking the rules and cutting corners. The next one, impatient versus patient. So impatient people tend to become easily annoyed, irritated, and angry with others, whereas patient people, well, we know what that looks like. They're more even-tempered. So I'll tell you another story, and I'm going to use myself as an example. And by the way, I score high risk on almost all of these dimensions. So it's a good thing I'm not working on the front line. It doesn't make me a bad person that I'm higher risk. It just means I'm not suitable for those positions. And it's all about fit. So back to impatient versus patient. I can be a bit more impatient on the road. And when somebody cuts me off in traffic, my natural impulse, that knee-jerk reaction, is to, snap and want to pull up beside the person and glare at them and maybe flip them a salute. Now I've learned that about myself and kind of to override that now so that I make better decisions, and I say to myself, look, they didn't do it to you personally, they just did it. Maybe they didn't see you, they just made a mistake. Greg, have you ever made a mistake on the road? Or maybe they're late for an urgent appointment, so cut them some slack. And all of that word tracking takes place in literally about half a second, and it defuses the situation. But one thing I want to make clear is I haven't changed my personality. My self-awareness has just led to a different outcome. There's a pattern interrupt that has changed my behavior. Make sense? I'm also highly distractible. So when I'm on the road, I'll use that as an example again because everyone can relate to it. I'm the guy that needs to be or wants to be on the cell phone, text messaging, making calls. I'm fiddling with the radio. I'm looking around the road. I want to be eating a hamburger or whatever. Again, I know that about myself now, so I force myself to put the phone in the glove compartment or in the back seat, or pull over to the side of the road if I have to make a call or send a message. So once again, my knee-jerk reaction is every time to pull out that phone, but now I override it and make a better choice with that self-awareness. So this self-awareness that I'm talking about does tie into that fifth application, which is the post-hire coaching on mentoring, training, and so on. There's that, we call it safety self-awareness, but as I said, that's for another day. Impulsive versus cautious. Now this one's about snap decisions. It's not about the thrill-seeking, which is a different dimension. Thrill-seekers are the ones who, you saw the skydiving and the bungee jumping and so on. Impulsive people, they don't think through the consequences of one's actions. And when we're doing that kind of coaching and training, or even the interviewing at the hiring stage, it's important to talk to people about the consequences. So you could say, here's a situation. What do you think might happen? Let's think it through. And storytelling is powerful. You could sit with that impulsive person and say, let me tell you about a time where there was this young fellow who was supposed to use a long-handled alignment wrench to stick up through the steel girders, and he didn't use it and sheared off his fingers and blah, blah, blah. That storytelling makes that very real and powerful at that point. So impulsive people get it. They now understand the consequences of one's actions. Cautious people tend to carefully evaluate options, analyze risk, and think everything through. So you've heard me touch on the employee development. Again, I keep saying this is another session, but I just want to kind of mention this. There's a communication gap happening in workplaces everywhere, and especially when it comes to safety. We get a lot of frontline, dare I say, more rough and tumble, blue-collar people, and I came from that kind of background, by the way. My father was a carpenter, but a lot of those people on the front line, no one's ever really talked to them about communication and self-awareness, and So they always think when they're looking at someone else, they don't understand why that person is different. So to an impatient person, someone who is patient may appear as too tolerant, too easygoing, a bit of a pushover. On the right column, to patient individuals, someone who is impatient may appear as hot-headed, and they can't figure out why they lose their cool all the time and fly off the handle. But when you get people together and they learn about themselves and how they're hardwired, and they learn how someone else is hardwired, it can be really powerful. And now they look at one another and go, oh, okay, so when you're snapping at me, you're not necessarily, mad at me all the time. It's just you treat everyone this way, and that's just how you deal with the world. And the impatient person's looking at that other person saying, okay, I get that when you're calm, it doesn't mean that you don't care about the work and about the production deadline. You just don't show it like I do. You internalize it. And like I said, that can really help break down the barriers and help people work more efficiently. And then there's, of course, the actual coaching that can take place. So one example among many is when coaching resistant workers, the supervisor or foreman needs to, help them understand you can question rules and procedures. It's okay to point out areas for improvement and question things, but come to me. Don't go, bad-mouthing me or the company to your coworkers. Come to me and let's have a conversation. And I want to know what you're thinking. Often resistant people have good ideas. But what's most important is they need to understand why a rule is in place. And once we take the time to respect them and explain why a rule is in place, they can be the biggest advocates, and they can be champions and go to their colleagues and say, hey guys, you gotta follow this. This is why. And storytelling is also a very powerful tool for these resistant people as well. Okay, one final thing that's interesting, and often people want to hear about this, is the analytics that can take place. So each of those dots or little diamonds on the far right down below are individual people's scores, and you can create a group scatter plot graph for different teams or divisions or locations, and you can slice and dice the data in all kinds of different ways. And this helps with business intelligence and decision support for identifying patterns and trends. You can compare one division or team with another. You can figure out, okay, who's hiring differently or who's training differently, and can we adapt some of their best practices in a different division, or why there's more safety incidents over here. Why is that? Do they need more training? Do they need more standard operating procedures or whatever it might be? So again, this is a bigger topic than we have time for here today. I just wanted to make you aware of this kind of thing. Part 5, does it really work? Yes. I'm not going to read this. It's pretty complicated. I actually couldn't even explain it all to you if I tried. We have specialists in psychology that this is what they do for a living. And earlier you saw a photo of me, but also of Stephen Race, and he's the co-founder of TalentClick, and he's our chief psychologist that is one of only about 50 people in North America that do psychometrics and test creation. And he's the one that makes sure everything that we do is fully valid and reliable. And any test that you choose out there, you need to make sure it's valid and reliable for hiring. There are some tools out there such as the Myers-Briggs or DISC, and I don't want to badmouth them because they are good tools for team building, but those companies themselves state themselves that those tools should not be used for hiring. That's not the main purpose. So just make sure you've got a tool that is proven methodology for hiring. Here's some actual case studies. So we love research. And here's one research study we did with a mining company, and we looked at over 600 miners in Australia. And it was really interesting. They gave us their safety incident data, and it showed that the frontline workers who scored highly aggressive had an average near miss rate 3 times higher than other workers, and an average first aid rate double that of the lower aggressive personality types. And their average recordable injury rate was 88% higher. Really interesting stuff. Here's one for you transportation companies out there. So the drivers with more of the distractible scores had a 40% higher at-fault accident rate. The drivers who scored more resistant than others had a 130% higher at-fault accident rate. And look at that, 4.5 times the number of traffic tickets than the people who were more compliant. And the one at the bottom makes most sense when you think about road rage. The people who are more irritable had a much higher at-fault accident rate and a near-miss rate. Here's one in the oil and gas sector. And by the way, this company, we've now assessed more than almost 10,000 people for them, and they've given us a lot of safety incident data, I think 40,000 data points, and they've been a really good partner over time. But what came out of this was something really interesting. It wasn't just the frontline workers, the impulsive peoples had a 5 times higher incident rate. It was the supervisors and foremen that we really had an aha moment about. The foremen with high resistance scores had a crew incident rate 2.3 times higher than those with low and average scores. And the supervisors who were more irritable and impatient had an average incident rate 4 times higher than those who were much more calm and patient. And we were scratching our heads about this, and we talked with the employer, and they kind of were as well, until we dug into it and actually talked to the frontline crew members. And what we determined at the end of the day was these supervisors, these foremen with the higher crew incident rates, a lot of them had been on the job for a long time, and they'd become complacent. And they grew a little bit more rule resistant, thinking, nothing's ever happened. I've been doing this job a long time, and why do we need to tie off or follow the standard operating procedure? We've got production pressures and deadlines. Let's just get this done fast. And when you combine that with the dimension at the bottom, the irritability or impatience, what happened was the crew people were afraid of the foreman. They were afraid to go to this guy and question authority. And so, especially the younger people, they would just take a chance and do something without checking, and that's when the problems arose. So this company spent a lot of time going forward with those supervisors and foremen who did score higher risk on the resistant and irritable dimensions. They spent a lot of time making them aware of their own personality traits and why they just have to override those tendencies that they have to to snap at people. They have to take the time to answer questions. They have to take the time to follow the procedure. It's okay. I know we've got production pressures and deadlines. It's okay. Safety is number one. So we're almost done here. Here are the takeaways. And again, a lot of this information will be available to you. We all have different personalities and risk profiles. All of us. We're all born differently. And again, I want to stress, just because someone is higher risk doesn't mean they're a bad person. We would never blame someone for being born more extroverted or introverted. It's all about fit to the position. Personality is definitely predictable and measurable. So let's put the right people in the right jobs at the hiring stage, or even if you have employees on staff, you might now use a tool like this and think, I need to take someone out of their current job and put them somewhere else. They're a great worker, wonderful team player, we like them, but they're just not suited for the position that they're in. Probably doesn't happen that often, but it can happen once in a while. I'll give you a quick example. We had a trucking company as a client, and they did an assessment on all their frontline team members, and we had one report that came back, and we had never ever seen such high risk scores. They were off the charts. And we talked to the company, and they started laughing, and they said, yeah, that's Joe. And we said, well, who's Joe? And they said, well, he was on behind the wheel as a long-haul trucker for years and years, and he just kept getting into crashes. He was so distractible, and it was untenable. So we took him off the road and put him on the loading dock. And that was no better because he was so distractible. There was forklift accidents, and he was having drivers drop loads in the truck or slam into the loading dock and so on. And so what we did at the end of the day is we actually put him in dispatch. And that was the perfect position for him. Lots of variety and stimulation. He felt like a bit of a, a go-to guy, a bit of a mover and shaker, lots of energy and activity, and he's happier than he's ever been, and he's a great dispatcher, one of our best employees. So there's an example of putting the right people in the right jobs. So it's all about eliminating safety incidents, improving your culture of safety excellence, and there are tools like this that are out there in the market. We hope that we've kind of expanded your mind to these possibilities now, and hopefully you found this interesting. So I'm going to open this up to any questions that you might have. In the GoToWebinar control panel, you can type in any questions that you have. I'll answer those. If you can't think of anything right now or you're just not comfortable asking, there's my phone number and my email address at the bottom. Or you can go back through your contact at the Headhunters. They can answer any questions you might have or put you in touch with me. There are also handouts available through this, and the Headhunters can provide those handouts, as well as, of course, the recording of this session. As I mentioned, it is being recorded, and you may wish to play it later or share it with someone else. So I don't see any questions. Hopefully that's a good sign, and we've been really thorough today. But I'll just give it one more second, and if not, then I'm going to turn it back over to Danielle. Our goal was to come in at less than 45 minutes, and it looks like we're doing that nicely.
Greg, I think we have a question.
The question is, how do I get the slides? So you can either email me, or you can email your contact at the Headhunters. The handouts are attached here. You'll see in your GoToWebinar dashboard. There are handouts, and I'm hoping you can all access those. So there are 3 methods there. If you're not able to pull them actually off of the GoToWebinar panel right now, then contact one of us.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Really appreciate the insightful discussion. I think the thing that really hit me the most. Sorry, Greg. Did you have something else?
No, I just said you're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, fantastic. Greg, the thing I was going to say is that really surprised me the most was combined, even on the call today. If you considered, the training deficiencies within the organization, and then the incidents caused by human error, that came in at about 80–90%, which really confirmed the stats that you had mentioned in the call. It really surprised me, the understanding how many incidents are caused by human error or training issues. So thank you so much again for sharing your knowledge and really talking to us about, the scientific tools that can help hiring managers really work towards a culture of safety, obviously preventing those injuries and reducing costly claims. To acknowledge the time that all of you spent with us on the call today, Greg and Talent Click have kindly offered 10 complimentary safety assessments per organization. So again, that's per organization. So for those of you that were on today's call, that comes to about a total value of $500. And in return, we'd ask that you take the time to fill in the survey, which will appear at the end of the call. And by doing this, you're going to help us identify future webinar topics that could be valuable for you and your business. We really want to know what's happening in the market today and be more efficient in continuing to partner with the organizations that we support. As Greg had mentioned, an email will be sent out with a recording of today's webinar. You'll also be able to access it on www.theheadhunters.ca, and that'll be up by the end of the day. And then go ahead, feel free to share it with your colleagues and leadership team. And if you're interested in hearing more about how personality assessments can help you and your business, please contact your local recruiter at the Headhunters, or you could also email connect@theheadhunters.ca. And once again, thank you so much, all of you, for your valuable time. We really hope you can join us on our next complimentary webinar, which is on February 15th. And the topic on that one, and we've actually had quite a surprising response to that one already, and that'll be on how to reduce stress and improve employee wellness with mindfulness. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Thank you again, Greg. Enjoy the rest of your day.